Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Thanks to Mark, Patrice, and Bernie, the rest of the team, for inviting me to speak today on one of my favorite topics, that being zero energy schools. Like Mark said, I'm from Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships. I'll explain really briefly kind of who we are just in a second here. But I wanted to make a quick note before I got started about this Connecticut Energy Network that you all have built and participate in regularly. I think it's a great kind of resource sharing, best practice knowledge network that you guys have constructed here. And it's one that I've actually mentioned to a few other states that we work with, just saying how valuable something like this can be for folks at the local level. It's something that I want to get started in other states and kind of replicate this model. So, just hats off to you all and the good work that you're doing. Sharing the knowledge that you all have at the local level, I think is, really how we are going to accomplish a lot of our goals. So just wanted to make that quick plug up front that, I'm really trying to share the good work that you all are doing with folks outside of Connecticut. So just quickly here, a little bit about SNEAP. We are a regional nonprofit organization committed to improving energy efficiency in the building sector throughout the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states. So we work everywhere from Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, down to DC, Delaware, and West Virginia. So a pretty big, geographical area here. And, of course, we work in kind of different areas in different states depending on, politics or interest in some of the topics that we work on. But a lot of what we do is trying to transform the market for energy efficiency and share best practices or develop resources that can help folks in different areas across the region. And I'll just note that map on the bottom there, we're one of 6 of these types of organizations across the country. So everyone except for California and Alaska and Hawaii are participate in these regional organizations that we collaborate with regularly as well. So we've done work in Connecticut for a number of years. We've been around, this is actually our 25th year, and we're still led by the same executive director that founded us, Sue Coakley. So we've been doing work in Connecticut for a number of years and, have a great partnership with the state and the utilities and, more recently are looking to engage with folks like you all at the local level. So here's just a quick overview of what I'll try to cover today in the time that I have. I'm going to talk a little bit about what zero energy schools really are, provide some background and overview and define, that term zero energy. Then we're going to look into some strategies for success. So things that I've seen from around the region that, I think you can take home with you and use in your conversations with important decision makers. And then I'll try to share some examples of where this is actually happening. So some specific buildings that, we're seeing take on zero energy initiatives and be successful with. I'll try to share some of those case studies with you and talk about where you can find some others as well. And then lastly, I'll hit on some other resources that I think are helpful for this zero energy schools conversation, but then broader kind of community-wide initiatives because a lot of the work we do at NEAP, schools is a key component of it and a big facet of what I do, but we also do focus on broader, energy planning at the local level type initiatives as well. And then plenty of time for questions and answer at the end as well. And I'll note that, I tend to talk really fast and might use abbreviations throughout. So if there's anything folks want a clarification on or, question throughout, just jump in. You don't have to wait till the end. Raise your hand or just shout it out. I'm flexible. So anything you want to ask about, feel free to. So I just wanted to kind of establish a few goals for, things that I'll be talking about. My main goal is to leave you all with things that you can bring back to your own communities, whether that's resources or some data, stats, those sorts of things. I want to leave you with things that you can take back. I'm curious who's going through the school construction process, for the first time now, or the next time that they go through it will be the first time. So a good chunk of folks. So I think, that just kind of show.
Our town or us individually?
I'm sorry?
You mean our town or us individually?
I guess you individually, your involvement in it for the first time. Because I think, a big part of this is that communities don't build schools that often. It's every 20, 30, maybe more years, just kind of depending on how many schools you might have. So it's a unique process in each individual community that I think requires careful consideration. Politics come into play. stakeholder engagement is a big piece of this. So, I think there's a lot of things that I can share that I've seen work elsewhere, but just know that, careful consideration for your own community needs to be taken into account. So hopefully with my presentation, I'll give folks an understanding of the importance and some strategies for stakeholder engagement, recognizing the many co-benefits to zero energy schools, and then, like I said, sharing some resources that you can take back with you. So I'll start with a little bit of background about zero energy schools. So I know there's a lot of terms that are used to kind of talk about this same idea of a zero energy school. Folks use net zero school or zero net energy school. There's a lot of different kind of terms floating out there. And, generally speaking, they all kind of mean the same thing. We're talking about a very energy efficient building and then using renewable energies so that you can get that annual energy consumption down to zero. So this is the official definition from the Department of Energy that we align ourselves with. I think it's a great resource. If you haven't seen it, I have it linked here on the screen that gets into a lot of the weeds. If you're interested in kind of diving into site versus source UI and, defining a zero energy campus, there's a lot that goes into this, but I don't want to get bogged down into the weeds of defining this, because I think critically important is, building an energy efficient building first and then using renewable energies to get to zero energy. So that's kind of the core piece that I want to stress and that I'll be using throughout this presentation. So driving down that energy consumption, first and foremost. So this slide just kind of shows, some of the benefits or the outcomes that you might have from a zero energy school, just to kind of give you an idea of, what it looks like at the end of the day. So, a zero energy school, we try to really think about this holistically. Yes, we're talking about energy, but there's a lot of other things that come into play when we're talking about, a high performance or a zero energy school. Of course, we want the school to be educationally effective. And a lot of the aspects of the physical building system can play a part in that kind of productivity component, or that actual schoolwork component of this, which I'll touch on here in another moment or so. Is there anything else that folks look for, in a high performance or zero energy school that they think should be listed up on this? It's not meant to be holistic, but yeah, go ahead.
Obviously, healthy schools.
Healthy, yes.
Good ventilation, right, John?
Exactly, yes, Kenny. And I'll touch on that, if you.
To the death.
Exactly. Yeah, I know you will. Yes, back there.
The teaching mission of the school, the Board of Education, we're going to be very concerned that the school meet.
Yep.
The concept of the current teaching mission.
Right. Yep.
One that there was an interesting event yesterday at Yale on net zero schools, and there was a lot of talk about concrete,
Yep.
and a lot of schools are also emergency shelters in the event of storms.
Right.
So
Resiliency, yep, and I'll touch on that a little bit too. So I think all of these things are important pieces of the zero energy school kind of discussion, and we shouldn't lose sight of any one of them. And I think it's important to bring it up during our discussions, because what motivates one stakeholder group, won't really motivate another. Yes.
One other one that just occurred to me is sort of the integration of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And Simsbury being an example where they have an active bike and walk to schools program.
Yep.
So the notion of, is it just within the envelope of the building that you're doing net zero, or can we extend that to the connection?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, thinking about it holistically, that, those should be absolutely be factors in it. And, some of the guidance that I'll touch on does get into things like transportation as well. So, yeah.
I would also add the fact that if you're building this kind of school, that it's integrated into the teaching
absolutely.
Material,
Curriculum,
leveraging things like monitoring as an example, and using it as a lab for future young people.
Yeah, bringing up that next generation of folks.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, they'll start off on the Yep.
With the air ventilation that you've been touching on,
Yep.
are you getting into HEPA quality because of the invisible gases and things in the air, so therefore our systems actually have to close systems instead of a lot of windows being open?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be diving into that too much, but that's certainly a big a part of this. And like I said, with some of the resources that I'll recommend, it does get more into the weeds on that. But for this conversation, I'm not going to be diving too deep into that. Yes.
Yeah. As far as the education aspect, possibly creating a pathway to a field of profession, like energy management.
Right.
And also, when this work is going on, possibly we'd have to look at the liability for maybe creating internships for like high school students.
Yep. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of good work at like technical high schools with that sort of thing. Training facility managers, energy managers. So, yep, that's a part of it. Yes.
I was just going to say the same thing, but in a different phrase, a green job generator or incubator.
Yep.
Green job.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think these are all, very important parts. And, I think that the key here is to be thinking about a zero energy school holistically so that it integrates all of these different things into the process. So that's kind of, some of the things that we hope to get out of a zero energy school, or that we hope, it'll be. So here's kind of more of a look at, the actual physical building itself. And I had a slide in one of my earlier presentations that I used that, kind of depicted an actual school building and had a lot of glass in it, and rightfully so. Somebody, made the note that, that's not the type of school that we should be promoting. And, that gentleman was correct. There's some negatives to building a school with a lot of glass on it. So I swapped that out and used kind of this better graphic anyways that, describes what a zero energy school is. So, kind of physical building components that we're talking about with a zero energy school. It's things like a really, tight, well-insulated building envelope, high quality windows, high R values, and this helps with other things like resiliency as well that I'll get into. LED lighting with lighting controls, both inside and exterior lighting as well is an important part of a zero energy school. Of course, efficient HVAC equipment, that's a huge part of this as well. We're seeing a lot of interest in heat pumps and geothermal as well. And then, I think this is an increasingly important part of zero energy schools, which is plug load management. We're seeing more and more schools adopt, tablets, iPads in lieu of textbooks. I'm sure, folks have stories of that, happening today in their own schools. I was in a school not too long ago that had a giant charging station for all their iPads that they can roll out to different classrooms. So, working that into the design process and making sure that you have strategies and policies in place that talk about plug loads, because they're increasingly taking a bigger chunk of the energy used in schools. And I'll I'll show that in another slide here in a little bit. So this is kind of the physical systems that go into a zero energy school that I just wanted to highlight up front here. So my next few slides here will hopefully, yeah, sure.
You showed a ground source heat pump. The objection that always comes up is that they're very expensive from the school people.
Yep.
Do you know examples where it's been done with air source heat pumps, which are less efficient but less costly?
Yeah. So there's a school right now being, in the design phase in Massachusetts that's using air source heat pumps. And, that's a question that we keep getting asked, and I don't unfortunately have the data right now to show, or, to show that it's in practice, but I hope that it's coming. And I'll certainly, share that along. And I think other parts of the country, it's happening probably more than in the Northeast, but I think a lot of what we need is localized examples of that. So we'll be happy to share that. Yeah.
We have a speaker right after lunch who's going to talk about all electric HVAC systems, and I think he'll touch on those variable refrigerant flow, the VRF.
Right.
Yep. Just one other comment, and I think New England in particular probably is challenged on this, is siting and placement within the plot of land.
Yep.
And I'm imagining that where you're usually replacing or retrofitting or refurbishing schools in this part of the country, it's a lot harder to get to, but
exactly.
It's a huge impact if we can take it as a greenfield.
Yeah, absolutely. And the easiest application for zero energy is in that new construction building. It is possible in major renovations, but it is a lot more challenging. So that's an important kind of point to make. But I think that kind of goes back to the original discussion about when we're talking about zero energy, making the most energy efficient building possible. That should be the focus of kind of, where things start for this conversation. So, like I said, these next few slides are going to touch on some strategies for success with high-performance zero-energy buildings. This first one here, I just wanted to kind of make note of this excellent guide that has been created through the Department of Energy and the NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab. A lot of folks here might be familiar with Paul Torsolini from NREL, who's a local Connecticut resident, a great resource to tap into on zero energy schools specifically. He led a lot of this work that was being done through the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Schools Accelerator, which basically just takes a group of people from across the country and tries to create kind of replicable roadmaps so that we can help individual states and communities achieve zero energy buildings. So it was a 3-year process where they were able to engage with a lot of stakeholders and try to create these steps that you see kind of outlined on the screen here. And just to boil down building a zero energy school to 8 steps is pretty impressive in itself. There's a lot of details contained within this guide. I just wanted to kind of show the simplified steps, I guess I would say. But yeah, take a look at this guide for more details, and I'll be trying to touch on a few of these different pieces in my conversation today. Not touching on all of them, but I think a few of the most critical pieces I definitely will get into.
Can I just make a point?
Yeah.
Somewhere between 2 and 3 and 3 and 4, the building has to go out to referendum. The school has to go out to referendum with the town. And I think it's vitally important that engage the stakeholders happens before you go out to referendum. Otherwise, you end up with a hard number you got to work against. And it's very difficult. If there's any additional cost with the zero energy, you're fighting, against public whatever.
Yeah, no, I would almost say that engaging stakeholders should probably be number one.
It almost can shoot down ground source heat pumps if you don't get that commitment before you go out for work, right? We're seeing that in Brookfield right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Just to expand on that thought, our town needed to renovate 2, 3, or 4 schools, and that was what they were presenting to the town, with a series of meetings at all the schools in the town to acquaint the population with the decision-making process, and they had decided that 3 schools would probably be best. So I went to as many meetings as I could go to, and I said, are you thinking about net zero? And they weren't, of course. They were thinking about the educational needs. So I kept doing every one meeting I went to went up and I presented the idea. Let's not use the best 20th century technology to hit our schools. I think we're in the 21st century now. So at the last meeting, the architect was there, and also the whole board of directors of the town. And when I mentioned net zero, he lit up. He knew what I was talking about. And it's important, I think, to get that contact.
Early on.
And at that meeting, the town voted, I think, $2 million to add to the budget to make them net zero.
Wow. Yeah, exactly, and that's I think one of the best parts of this guide is it talks about what you just said and recommends people to work with their architects early on, set it in the RFP if you're going out to bid, set the goals right up front that you want it to be. Yeah.
I was the only person advocating for this. One person.
Well done.
3 schools.
Yes.
Okay, and let me just top that one very important point. Okay, when Eversource did their own group about net zero buildings and stuff, the architects proved they could do it for less, not plus 2 million, less.
Yep.
And then you're also saving the life of the building. So the costs are a lot less, both because the construction materials have come down and once you have it efficient, it works.
Yeah, the sizing of systems can be
So that's where
less.
you're getting political pushback because they make a lot of money on lights and electricity.
Yep. Let's go back here.
I may get to tell the Middletown story a little later again, but and I'll probably make this point a couple times today, but I think that net zero ought to be in step one as a need. And what happens is a feasibility study gets done and sent to the state to get them to agree that you need a school. And in that feasibility study, there's a basic design assumed. And if that basic design is not net zero, then you're already on the wrong road. And I just want to warn everybody, that's one of three things that can derail the possibility of a net zero school in your community. And so getting it baked right into the initial needs, so that, because otherwise the architect's going to bid on the feasibility study design. They're not going to include in their scope of work the work needed to create a net zero building. So then when you go and ask them after they're already hired, it's going to be more difficult for them to accommodate that additional scope.
That's exactly what this guy is getting at. Yes.
I just want to follow up on what Michael said. I'm also from Middletown. You were fortunate from Manchester to have just yourself. Well, we had the whole Clean Energy Task Force and allies. We had 20 people going to these meetings in Middletown to try to get a net zero school. But the architect, as Michael said, had already decided against it. And he made a public statement in one of these meetings. Well, we're doing a net zero school in Amherst, but we know that Middletown doesn't do stuff like that.
Oh my God.
Yes.
At some point in today's conversation or during your time, if you could share with us any other states where their State Board of Education, who gives money to many of us, percentage-wise, if they could integrate that into their program, that it must begin here, they have to opt out and give good reasons. Are there any states that have a policy, across-the-board policy, for net zero schools or something like that?
Yeah.
And also building codes.
Right.
Sometimes they get in the way.
I can touch on that. So we're doing work right now in Massachusetts on a project called MAZE. Massachusetts is achieving zero energy, and it's kind of fitting because it is kind of a maze navigating those waters. Part of it is on the energy code side of things, and then also on the school side. So we're working with the utilities and the Mass School Building Authority to look into or hopefully pilot test, some sort of program that would provide additional funding for zero energy schools. The utilities are interested in it and are actually rolling out a program or in the process of creating a program for zero energy schools, which is great to see. But I think what you said is important. Statewide policies to get at zero energy schools. I don't know of any. There aren't any in the Northeast right now, but hopefully the conversations are trending that way. So. Kentucky has, okay.
I could just tag on to that.
Yeah.
If you can refer any legislation language that's been passed by legislatures and departments of education committees.
I wanted to ask if anybody in the room knows anything, whether the Connecticut Department of Education or the facilities unit, or wherever the facilities unit is now, because it's got moved around a lot, does anybody know whether they're moving toward getting these policies in place? Any facility directors here know this?
I'll just mention that this is Peter Millman. So Mansfield went through this, and I'll be talking about it later. The Department of the General Administrative Services, General Administrative Services Department. I can't remember. It's actually a particular office within that. And when Mansfield went to first broach the subject of net zero with them for their new school, they were not that enthusiastic. As time went on, they became more enthusiastic. And one of the benefits of what we did in pushing that was that I think that we're beginning to pull them around. More discussion of it, more pressure from other school districts would be very helpful.
Yep. Yeah, two things on that. I think from what I've heard working with communities, sometimes bringing up zero energy early on throws people off, and they immediately say that's not possible, we can't do that. But if you start the conversation by saying, we want to have a building that has an EUI of 25, which is right around what you need to get at to achieve zero energy, saying that instead, so it's a very energy efficient building, starting with that. Sometimes people are like, oh, okay, we can do that, and then you kind of you move along, and and progress. So, sometimes just kind of starting that conversation there, I think, is important. So is there some, yeah.
Hi, yeah, I'm on my town's Clean Energy Task Force and Sustainability Committee, but I also work in the industry and have worked on a number of schools. And there's a conflict between, what the codes are, especially in Massachusetts. It's interesting where I'll see a high-performance building, but it's got a metal decking roof. And, there's a lot of other resources besides just glass and metal deck roof. And what's happening is, design will have other sources for natural lighting through top lighting, and you don't have to have your artificial lights on, and it lowers solar heat gain, and yet it helps with the circadian rhythms of the students. But then they get engineered out. Or it's the percentage between, the roof material and the daylighting materials, it's $2,000. And then the architect has to go through and calculate the energy savings, and they can prove that there's not an energy loss through their design. But the code has it that you can only have a certain percentage on the roofing or in the walls and windows. And I think it's a conflict between high-performance buildings or Northeast chips and the energy codes. Plus, in Connecticut, the energy code is actually very low. It could be beefed up tremendously.
Yeah, and I have colleagues, that are ingrained in the energy code discussion here. So hopefully, things will change. But I think it's an important, note to make that, a lot of these things do get value engineered out when you're even, you're putting them in there. But, what we can try to do is share data and share the importance of it and just try to keep fighting to keep those things in place. If that's our role, I think, a lot of the time. Sorry, yes. EUI is the energy use intensity. And basically what 25, why I said that number is because you'll see in this guidance here, this document, the NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, did a study showing that, how efficient does your building have to be in order to achieve zero energy? And it's somewhere in the 20 to 25 kind of ballpark in order to get to zero energy. So that's kind of just the goal that folks should be thinking about, or the number to establish in this process. And better explanation probably here in the guide if you're interested in diving into that. So I think there's a lot of conversation around these steps, and I just want to continue to move on to share some of the other thoughts that I have on the topic. So I think, engaging stakeholders, communicating the co-benefits, obviously a critically important piece. Energy is the second highest operating expense for schools. This is a number based on, I think, an EPA report looking at the entire country. So, there's a lot of opportunity within the energy kind of budget that schools have to save money and put that money back into things like textbooks or iPads or, staff salaries. And then I think, another important note on this is changing the conversation. I think it's been mentioned a couple times, but changing the conversation around, the focus on the upfront cost of building a school. Depending on the architect and the design teams that you work with, some will say that, it's achievable at the same comparable cost to a baseline building. Some, like we heard earlier, it could be done at less. And then some will say it's a lot more. But there's data out there that shows that it can be done at a comparable cost. So, changing the conversation about the upfront cost, thinking about the long-term savings, I think is important. And I've provided a few resources at the end that talk to those points. So if you can, bring that to your design teams and say, hey, this is what others have done, or build that into, the process when you're selecting the design teams, I think that piece is important. Yes?
With regard to the life cycle cost of the building, what percent of it is energy cost for a typical Northeastern school, whatever, 200,000 square foot building?
Yeah. That's a good question. What percentage is that?
Is it?
29%?
Say it again?
29%?
29%.
Is the energy cost? Because I've seen upwards of like 80-85% over the course of like 40 or 50 years for a school building. Or a building, a commercial building. But I saw it written one place. I didn't confirm that as like accurate. It was on the internet. It
I was
might be true.
gonna refer back to you, Tim. The town of Cheshire's education budget for the next fiscal year is 75 million, right? You're on board.
Yeah, 75 million.
And how much do we spend on energy?
Oh, it's a couple million.
Yeah. So you figure 1 million out of 75, what percent of the total, never mind the operating expense of the school itself, but of the entire budget, to get people to be really interested in spending money on a net zero building, you gotta show what the total impact is. And if it's 1 million out of 75, maybe it's not such a big deal. I'm not saying there aren't other advantages, certainly there are.
Yep.
But people make a lot of their decisions based on economics and,
Yep.
and all of that. And if it's 1 or 2 million out of 75, they're gonna go ho hum. Why put a lot of effort into this?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So I think you need to take that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't have an answer for it, but I think it's a good thing to look into. So I'll try to do that.
I mean, if the simple argument I make is if you put more insulation in the attic,
Yeah.
you have lower annual bills. So if you're talking about, if it is 85% of the 40-year life, you can draw that down. That ends up having a real economic impact that people can understand better than, an extra couple $100 that month for the heating bill, which is annoying.
I just want to speak up for John a little bit here. We gave him a limited amount of time. We've got a very full agenda. I love the discussion, but if we could focus questions on understanding, is there something John said you didn't understand? And we'll have time for discussion later, because otherwise John has no chance of getting through it.
All right, so I'll continue on here. I wanted to share kind of a breakdown of end uses in this. This is a report put together by the Mass GBC looking at the cost of zero energy buildings, and that's one that I referenced that talks about kind of that, not so high incremental cost of building a zero energy school. So this just was to show kind of the three major end uses, those being plug loads, lighting, and heating. And I think I was a little struck by how significant plug loads were. That's the bottom blue one there, is a huge chunk of the energy load. So I just kind of found that to be interesting. I think the environmental benefits of a zero energy school, this can be a tough kind of tough thing to communicate with folks about. Some folks are really interested in it, others not so much. So, I think proceed with caution, know your audience, know who you're talking with when you bring up some of these things. But I think it is important to, at least to talk about as one of the co-benefits. You're reducing your emissions if you're building a zero energy school. You're aligning with, state or local goals. You're helping achieve goals that might be setting, that, as energy committees you might be setting for your town. And then, there's an important piece where we can use the school as a teaching tool, and I'll show a few examples of that. I think that's been touched on. I think it's an important component of this. You're able to build that into the curriculum, show energy kiosks or energy dashboards in the school to actually communicate the benefits of it. And then, I think this is a big one that resonates with a lot of people and, should definitely be brought into the conversation about, health and occupant productivity. So there's a study that the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health did that's really good. And actually, a couple of the notes that they make are from Connecticut schools. So some interesting kind of local data that they used as well. But, improving things like lighting, the acoustics, ventilation all have a huge impact on, student health and learning. We had an architect do a study of some schools in Concord, New Hampshire that they built, and over the first 5 years that the building was operated after building to a high performance standard, they saw some pretty significant decreases in absenteeism. All of that might not be able to, attribute it to the fact that it's a high performance school, but it's good data that shows the real impacts that these are having. So I think it's just important to note IAQ is indoor air quality. And then kind of the broader umbrella is IEQ, which is indoor environmental quality. So that brings in things like acoustics and lighting and, more than just the air quality. But, these are real things and real impacts that they're having. So things like, a noisy HVAC system, if you're sitting in the back of the room, that's going to be distracting to students, and they're not going to be able to, pay attention or even hear what the teacher might be saying. So I think thinking about these projects holistically, bringing in this information is important to, continue to build that business case for it. And then kind of the last piece I'll touch on as far as kind of communicating the co-benefits. This was brought up before, resiliency. This is increasingly and has been a huge topic, I think, at the local level, especially, in kind of coastal communities, but elsewhere as well. So here's the DOE definition, but I think, it's important to bring this in, things like passive survivability. So if you're building with a tight envelope, you're allowing people to shelter in place or go to the school and spend time there in a comfortable environment, so it's not overheating or losing heat depending on the season, I guess. But those types of features, building that into it, and talking about that and creating a holistic plan at the local level, will make sure that you're having the most benefits for resiliency that you can. So definitely encourage folks to talk more about resiliency, and just wanted to highlight a few final points on kind of communicating the benefits, focusing on energy efficiency. That I think I've hammered that one home. That's kind of the first and most important thing to talk about with zero energy schools. Establishing goals early on, selecting your design teams and project partners. Based on their kind of agreement or their willingness to go after those goals, I think is really important. Having an energy champion, so folks like yourselves that are willing to really drive the bus here and hold people accountable and push for higher performance, those sorts of things go a long way. So I think as much as it seems like you're one of many stakeholders involved in this process, you can have a major difference, and I think we've seen that here in Connecticut. And then the last 2 points I'm going to touch on a little bit later is engaging occupants in post-occupancy behavior. So it's great to design a building to a zero energy standard, but there's a lot that still needs to be done once the building is up and running to ensure that it's achieving its goals. So I'll touch on a couple of resources here in a moment. So I'm not going to dive too deep into these exemplars, but I just wanted to make folks aware of and share where you can find more information about these schools. So this first one is from Newport, Rhode Island, and it opened actually in 2014, so it's been around for a little while now. And it was the first zero energy designed public school in the region. There have been issues with the school. Like I said, post occupancy is a big deal, and it hasn't exactly achieved its goals of being zero energy, but it still is a very high performing school. So I think there's certain lessons learned and things that I've captured in an exemplar that's on our website that you might be able to take advantage of. But you can see some of the features that it has, maximizing natural daylight. Not only does that reduce the need for indoor lighting, but has those health benefits and productivity benefits as well. So like I said, more information on our website about that project. One that just
If you look back at that slide,
yeah.
There's no cost associated for any of those items.
Right.
I mean, this is just free, basically.
Yeah, so exactly, that's, yeah.
Can you clarify?
Yep.
You said it didn't hit the goals. What did it achieve?
I don't know off the top of my head what the EUI it actually did achieve. I'd have to go back and look and get back to you, but it is, it's an energy efficient building. It didn't achieve zero energy, like I said, but it is, a very high performance building. Yes.
So one problem I experienced with a brand new building is it tends to attract more use.
Right.
And so it's not a one-for-one old building to new building.
Yep.
Tear it down, put a new one in, you get more people using it.
Yeah.
Energy consumption increases.
Exactly. So, I think that's a big part of the conversation that you have to have with the design teams and outlining, how much you think the building will be used. You're going to see an increase in, nighttime activities, air conditioning, right, is a part of that. Summer activities will probably be more because folks, you got a brand new building, folks will want to use it. So that's an important part of that conversation that you're having with your design teams. Talk about kind of the scheduling of the building and, maybe plan for, more than, what your old building had is probably a best practice there. And then the other exemplar I wanted to share was this King Open School that recently opened in Cambridge, Mass. And here's a little bit of information about what it's actually achieving and the scope of the project. So it came in a little bit above the average cost for a school building in Massachusetts, but they're saving 42% annually on energy, and it achieves a 25 EUI before renewables. So this is, again, operating very close to a zero energy building. It's just opened last year, so I'm sure they're doing some commissioning and kind of honing in on how to make sure that it's operating as efficiently as it can, but it is another great example of what can be done. And interestingly, I drove by this not too long ago, and I was stunned by the amount of glass that they have on the building. So just kind of an interesting note there. So I know I've only got a couple more minutes, and I just wanted to conclude by sharing a few resources. This one here is for existing buildings. So NEAP has an operations and maintenance guide that's meant to put existing buildings, whether that's a school building or other public buildings, kind of on the pathway to high performance. So sorry, I'm just kind of going quickly here, but the guide provides a lot of like checklists and kind of low to no cost behavioral type changes or programs that you can implement in your buildings to improve the efficiency. But it also goes beyond just energy efficiency. It touches on all of these different topics here, from establishing O&M policies to indoor environmental quality and pest management, recycling and cafeteria best practices. So, it's more of a comprehensive guide. And, us being kind of energy people at NEAP, we relied on a lot of folks outside of the energy space to help us kind of put together this guide. So it's not just, me putting a ton of ideas down on paper. We're engaging with stakeholders to share things like checklists that can, help folks in public buildings improve and get on the pathway to high performance. And as a part of this, we're always trying to highlight case studies and good examples of what folks are doing. So if there's anything, if you're taking a look at the guide and something you want to share with me, I'd love to highlight it in the guide and share the good work that you guys might be doing in your own buildings. Quick look at kind of the energy efficiency section of the guide. So, starting with benchmarking and understanding your utility bills, to then, more measures that can be taken with energy management systems or lighting systems, HVAC maintenance, commissioning. These are some of the areas that the energy efficiency section touches on, and I apologize, I'm going through this really quickly here. Here's a slide that I've used a bunch in the past, and probably have gotten more requests for folks to use this one than any other slide that I've ever created, so it must resonate with folks for some reason. But I think it just shows some of the good data that's out there on the importance of building in things like natural daylighting and ventilation. So I just wanted to, I'm not going to read those to you, but I just wanted to supply you guys with some stats along the way, so things that you can use, and there's other resources that are linked here as well that you can take back with you. So this goes back to the point about using the school as a teaching tool. So two of those pictures on kind of the left side and then the top are from schools in Concord, New Hampshire, and they wanted to kind of illuminate or color some of the systems in the building really brightly so that students would be asking questions about it, or they'd be able to point things out to students to show what different systems are. This bottom right one is some signage that was put into, I think actually that East Bay Met School, and just talks about the different benefits of renewable energy or solar thermal that they have in their school building. And this is kind of built in throughout. So there's a lot of different information about energy efficiency. They have an energy dashboard so that you can see in real time, how the building is actually performing. So things like that are definitely really important to build in and build into the curriculum, teach the students about throughout. And then just wrapping things up, I know I'm probably right about time, right? I mentioned that we do work beyond just schools at NEAP. So one of the projects that I'm working on now is called ACE. It's a DOE-funded project. Stands for Achieving Community Efficiency, and this is working kind of holistically, helping communities with their energy planning process, working on things like benchmarking policies. We're doing some work right now with Rhode Island on a shared energy manager. So they've got a group of 6 communities that are looking to hire one energy manager. And then they would do work in all the communities, and it's a way to share resources and kind of reduce the budget impacts that it might have on each individual community. But Connecticut is a part of this. Connecticut Deep has been involved in the project, and all that means really for you all is that we're able to use funding to do this work in the state of Connecticut. So there's a few different ways you can get involved. Free technical assistance is a big component of this, so we're able to help you with your energy plans or come to your community and do a presentation on things like Northeast CHIPS, which is a standard for high performance schools, and various other things as well. So if you're interested in learning more, I'd be happy to give you more information or chat about what can be done. So I just wanted to make that note, that we are available for kind of more deeper dives on these things, and technical assistance is kind of the term that we use. So I mentioned a bunch of resources, that step-by-step guidance from NREL, some of the health benefits and cost information, and then some additional resources here as well. So I just wanted to, kind of leave that behind, and I think this presentation will be available to you all, so you can click directly on those links. Just to give you an idea, Mark kind of teed it up in the beginning. We have a lot of free resources at NEAP, so you can go right onto neap.org. And check out all the resources that I've mentioned, but then additional ones like on the right side is an exemplar of a high-performance school in Concord, New Hampshire. That middle one is more like a community-wide kind of tool that helps plan and prioritize for energy efficiency projects at the local level, kind of walks you through the process and things that you should be thinking about. And then on like the heat pump side of things, my colleagues have been doing a great job on that initiative, and we have a lot of good information, buying guides, installer guides, those types of things to take a look at, as well as like home energy management systems. So a lot of information I know on there that I just threw at you. And I'll wrap up by just making a quick plug. We're having a summit this year, actually in New Haven, Connecticut. So if you're interested, and it's actually focused this year, this is the first year we're doing it focused on decarbonizing in communities. So, I think that might be of interest to a lot of folks. And, we're kind of in the agenda crafting phase right now. And I'll make a plug because I'm leading a few sessions, and I'd love to highlight some local examples of where this type of good work is happening, whether that's like, building resiliency and energy efficiency in, integrating those things, or, communities that are working on good kind of decarbonization efforts. Would love to highlight those things. So if you want to grab me after and share any stories, and potentially throw an idea for somebody that we could get to present, that would be awesome. But yeah, more information on that on our website. And with that was a lot of information. Thank you guys. That's my contact info.